Hi, I'm local author Richard Flentge. This is one of my books, Mule Tack, and this is the story of before, during, and after Ulysses S Grant visit to Cape Girardeau. This is for the Chris Museum, which I'm about half a mile away from right now where I'm standing, and I'm standing in front of Fort D here in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. The story of Grant's visit to Cape Girardeau has a wide swath of a thread or a pathway through American history. This is where he was promoted to the command level. He received a large number of troops under him, responsibility for payroll payments, procurement, as well as advanced military intelligence was received here in Cape Girardeau. So I would say the weight of the world was put on him. And he took a morning trip up the Mississippi from Cairo, Illinois. And I'm sure if you can imagine what was going on in his mind, he had been re-enlisted now in the Army just a few months, four or 5 months, and he is now summoned by the President of the United States. Things are getting quite skirmishy. There was a major battle a few months ago in Wilson Creek, Missouri, that resulted in about nearly 3,000 casualties. This thing is getting big, and Grant had things on his mind. So you can imagine he's putting up the river, going to a somewhat hostile location that has had riots as well as troop movements. His personal safety is something he has to be considering. Now, in thinking of what was on his mind, I believe it was Napoleon. Napoleon was the French leader that had conquered some of Europe and fell by invading Russia. But Napoleon had perfected a few things. One was mass troop movements, the perfection of attack techniques against line procedures, and he killed a lot of people. He also developed something that was also very popular in the Civil War, which was the Napoleon cannon. That is a short, fairly easy to transport cannon that was almost like a shotgun blast. It was a short range, what is called an anti-personnel cannon. So through U.S. Grant's thoughts, he would be remembering the invasion of Russia, the techniques of Napoleon, and I'm sure he's starting to think about what's going on in this Civil War. And one of the things that's going on is that the machinery of war is gearing up. Rifles are becoming more accurate, as well as mass production of cannons and weaponry, transport systems. This thing is getting big. So he pulls up into Cape Girardeau, stays downtown. Cape is somewhat established. There were still slaves in the area at the time that he was there, and he's got to think about what President Lincoln is going to tell him. Story about before, during, and after Ulysses S. Grant's visit to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which was in late August, September 1861. This is a view really of what the river would look like. The foliage, the landscape would be very similar to what it is right now. And in late August, you have the summer heat. And if you're around the river, it gets very flat. We call it glass. And his ride would have started in Cairo, Illinois, just north of Fort Defiance, at the confluence of the two largest rivers in North America. Most likely he would have boarded a steam transport ship that had openings underneath it that stored the horses and cargo, and then on top were the passengers. And he would have taken a very leisurely ride up the river, and most likely arriving about now, 10:30 or 11 in the morning. He would not have been dressed in any elaborate military garb, because Missouri was still in turmoil. And in fact, the day before he had arrived, the commander of the forces there had declared martial law in Missouri. There had been riots in St. Louis, quite a few skirmishes, and he was stepping into a pretty good sized mess. But this is what it would look like, and this is what it would feel like. And we're here now at one of the things he left as his legacy to Cape Girardeau, which is Fort D. Okay, I'm still here at Fort D, and I'm standing in front of their Quaker cannon. And this was another device used, and I'm sure commissioned by Ulysses S Grant. This is actually about the size of a 32-pound cannon that was a spoof. It is a fake cannon, a painted log in a cannon position, and anybody coming from the river, if they would look up here on reconnaissance or some sort of an intelligent mission, that would make them think there was a cannon in this position. And that sort of goes back to Grant's pragmatism. Now, prior to coming to Cape Girardeau and having his command position, Grant had done a lot of things. And a matter of fact, he was in St. Louis, that's where he met his wife, had a farm there, and one of his interesting stories was he sold firewood. And that's how he made money. So he had some down and out times, and he sold firewood. Now, the interesting thing I find about firewood is, have you ever chopped firewood? Have you ever split 300 or 400, 500, 600 pieces of wood? That's a tough job, and that's a tough man that does it. Interestingly enough, President Lincoln was also known for his log splitting abilities. So here before he came to Cape Girardeau, he had chopped firewood. And that says a little bit about his spine and his character and his strength, as well as President Lincoln. So he also had clerked in a store at Galena, Illinois. And he was sort of about like a Tractor Supply manager. So you have a manager type person, pretty pragmatic, had good organizational skills, and he had been West Point educated, and they certainly have very good skill sets that are transferred there. And he had also served in the Mexican War. So his history is something I think is very important to understanding the man at this point in his time. 6 months ago, he was stacking dishes in a Dollar General in today's term, and now he just got a letter from the President of the United States, and he's coming here to basically like a riot area. He doesn't exactly know what he's going to receive here. Cape, you know, was a decent community, but he's stepping off the ship with a lot of heavy stuff coming his way. So that is one of the backgrounds before. That's a view of the Common Pleas Courthouse, and that is a place Grant visited while here in Cape Girardeau. Now, most likely, although there are not exactly accurate historical accounts, that is where he met the liaison from the President of the United States to receive his command level papers. There would have been a man dressed in a suit, Ulysses S Grant, in probably a nicer set of military outfits, but still not much of any insignias or emblems to indicate he was an officer of command level. And he would have quietly slipped up there and gone into one of the rooms and sat down across the table from a man with a leather satchel. And as he pulled out his satchel, he had the president's seal on them, and began to discuss his promotion to command level. Now, command level in the Civil War meant more troops. It meant more money that you were responsible for, more lives, and more important military actions. The summation of what was given to Grant at this time point was the indications of the invasion of the South, the activity that the Union Army was going to have to take in the Western theater of the war to win it. And that was a heavy load to be dropped on a former store clerk, not 6 months into his re-enlistment into the military. Now, more than likely, I would presume, Grant walked down here, and this was his view, which was a mighty expansive view of the Mississippi River. And he smoked a cigar. I bet he smoked more than one. And he walked and paced. Over here were probably some ships and some steamboat transports. But he had to think a lot about what he had just been given. He knew the effects of Napoleon. He knew the advancement of weaponry, the Manet ball, the Napoleon anti-personnel cannons, the siege weapons that were being produced, for he had been in charge of some of the armaments in the ironworks there at Pilot Knob in central Missouri. He knew the area. He had a lot going on in his mind. So he looked up and down the river a few times, and I'm sure he had some meditative thoughts. And I would say the most telling story of Ulysses S. Grant here in Cape Girardeau was the letter that he wrote to his wife here, probably just across the street, while looking out over this river, and within probably a few hours of meeting up there in the Common Police Courthouse. He wrote his wife and said, you know, be cheerful with me. The safety of our nation depends on me. And my only fear is that too much may be expected of me. And that is Ulysses S. Grant, time in Cape. Now, after that letter, the battles began. The troop masses formulated, and it was April 1862 with a large group of people from Cape Girardeau, the builders of the Fort D's, a contingent of Cape Girardeoans, had the Battle of Shiloh. So that is some of the history of Cape Girardeau. He stepped on his transport, and within 6-7 months, there were 25,000 U.S. casualties under his command. And that is the weight and the thread of history that runs through Cape Girardeau. And I'd like to thank the Crisp Museum for this opportunity to speak. I'm Richard Flentge, your local historian and storyteller, and come back maybe for another episode. We'd love to have you here at the Crisp Museum.